Good evening. This is a little bit weird for me. Can you still hear me? Okay, thank you. Uh, yeah, I'm doing this from Manhattan, and so you might hear the occasional police siren or ambulance or fire brigade, and if that happens, I'll pause for a few seconds and let it pass. So please bear with me on that. Um, it's It's good to be here with you today. I wrote this book, Agile IT Org Design, to describe the organizational aspects of achieving agility, more from the point of view of achieving through market responsiveness, and in big organizations, a better reputation for IT in the eyes of the business. And one of those aspects, team design is one of those aspects of organizational agility. I also have a closer connection with continuous delivery because I used to be market-facing product owner sort of role for a continuous delivery tool from ThoughtWorks called Go. It helps you create build and deployment pipelines. But that's really the nuts and bolts of continuous delivery. To start this off, I would like to take a step back and at this point, let me see if I'm able to move my slides. Great, yeah. So take a step back and ask ourselves, when we say continuous delivery of what? And there is a easy technical answer to this, and that is, it's continuous delivery of software, where software is deployable throughout its life cycle, one-touch releases, it's always in a deployable state. And that's a technical answer to continuous delivery of what. But really, in my mind, when I'm asking that question, I want to distinguish between two potential modes of doing continuous delivery. The first one is very common in big organizations where continuous delivery really means continuous delivery of predefined scope. Whereas you can potentially think of another mode of continuous delivery, which is delivery of verifiable value, continuous delivery of verifiable value. And I would like to emphasize that these are two different things. Although it's a common assumption that doing the first mostly automatically results in the second, but it's clearly not true, and I want to use a mock example to illustrate this. And so this is, I don't know if you can read what's there on the screen, but it's a mock attempt at bringing a bridge analogy to this whole situation. In software development, we often use bridge metaphors, and the situation here describes business asking IT to build a bridge, changing the specs along the way, finally getting it done, but ultimately realizing that nobody is riding the bridge. And it turns out that in this process, IT was really blindsided by the existence of a tunnel, which people continue to use before and after the bridge. And so that's really the difference between delivering scope versus delivering benefits. And one does not automatically ensure the other. To depict this in a slightly different way, in a more generalized fashion, in a lot of big organizations, this sort of vicious cycle is in play, where work gets funded in terms of scope to be delivered. IT delivers the scope, there's a lot of output of unverified value, and finally, but it does not translate into a lot of business benefit. And because of that, business has to come up with other hopeful ideas, which translates into more work getting funded within IT, more output, and so on. And this is the mode in which IT is mainly set up as a delivery organization. Its job is to deliver whatever business comes up with. And when this goes on for a while, and organizations realize that okay, we are not really getting the benefit. I mean, if you still don't realize that this is really a problem of setting up IT just as a delivery organization, then what it results is, there is people who look at it as an IT problem. They tend to then put more pressure on IT to say, hey, your budget is bloating every year, you need to be more efficient, and somebody decides to fund a transformation attempt, which is more of a delivery only transformation attempt. And it and in the process they might try to make sure that everybody does Scrum and does deployment pipelines and so on, and you might get some benefit out of it in terms of fewer defects and more frequent and reliable deployments into production and so on. You might get some benefits out of it, but really the big price is missing until we address this side of things, where we move from a mode where we are delivering scope to a mode where we are jointly solving problems and thereby delivering benefit. So yeah, as part of when we talk about team design for continuous delivery, I think it's useful to think about designing teams such in a way that it's possible to advance from delivering scope to really solving problems. And to qualify that a little bit more, solving problems in a manner that is progressive and verifiable, so without making huge upfront risky bets. And this is another way to depict it. You might have seen a variation of this from the Spotify papers, but this is another way of describing a mode in which the first mode above is scope delivery mode, where a project gets funded and then the releases are planned in such a way that the potentially benefits are realized only at the very end. Whereas there is a way of doing it where you think of it as a problem to be solved and progressively solve that problem. Yeah, so the problem is not, if you take here for example, the problem is not to build a car. The problem is there is a transportation problem, and you can solve it in a very less sophisticated manner when you begin, and slowly evolve towards a more sophisticated solution. That's what we mean by a progressive solution. Now, mechanically, in the mechanical world, this might not make a lot of sense because it's hard to imagine how you evolve the same effort from a unicycle to a bicycle to a motorcycle and so on. But software presents us a much better opportunity, because software is so malleable that you can actually think of any problem and think of a way to solve it progressively. But for that, yes, we need to move from a mode where where there is one team who is responsible for defining the solution and the other team which is responsible for delivering the solution, although in a continuous delivery fashion. But to really get together and get into a mode where we can solve problems together. And to go back to the bridge example again, it's not about business telling IT, hey, we need to build a bridge, how much is it going to cost? But rather maybe talking about, hey, we need to think of a better way of crossing the river. And maybe the first attempt is to just build a ferry service and see if there is any interest in it. And then maybe think about a ropeway, or maybe just think about upgrading the existing tunnel, and finally think about a whole new bridge. Now, here is where I get more into the team design aspect of things. This change from delivering scope to solving problems, it's difficult to achieve this in projects mode. As long as an organization is executing projects, it's difficult to move from delivering scope to solving problems. And why is that? Because the problems that we are trying to solve, they're typically long-lasting problems. They are long-lived problems. You solve them progressively, right? So, and as you get the feedback from the earlier stages of solution, we come up with newer ways of, or better enhancements around it. So this requires long-lasting teams who can own and live with a problem for a relatively long period of time, couple of years, if not more. whereas project teams tend to be temporary teams. Second, the teams need to be empowered to steer course based on feedback from production. Whereas project teams are usually conceived on the basis of a project plan. There is a plan and the plan is what is funded. And so there is very limited scope. You can talk about, okay, within the scope delivery scope of things, we can say, oh yes, we have to deliver 100 points of scope, and we can have a must have, should have, and nice to have buckets, and we can play around a little bit with the points. But that's not what I'm talking about here. Yeah, that's there is room for some scope variability even within the constraints of a project. But really, for getting into this mode of really solving problems and verifiably solving them and doing it progressively, it requires a different kind of empowerment where teams can put things in production and use that feedback to steer the course. And this also means, if you're talking about putting things in production and learning from that, then you have to be a build plus run team. Whereas typically projects are build only teams. They build something and they hand it over to some other team to take care of it. Whether it's support or production monitoring or whatever it is, they hand it over to somebody else. And again, if we are still in that mode, then it's difficult to own a problem and live with it and solve it progressively and verifiably. So what does products mode look like? If you are in this mode where we are actually able to own a problem, then yes, one, we need to be, these teams need to be long-lived. They need to live as long as the problem, and they need to be aligned to business capabilities. So for an example, if you, in an e-commerce type of organization, you can imagine that you would have a long-lived catalog team, an order management team, fulfillment team, and so on. And these are examples of business capabilities in the e-commerce domain. As long as the company is doing e-commerce, they're very likely to have a catalog capability, an order management capability, a fulfillment capability, and so on. And depending on the size of the organization, you might not have just one team of 15 members per capability. You might have to break them down into sub capabilities and so on. But nevertheless, they stay aligned to one area of the business. And they have to be real cross-functional beyond the traditional sense of the term. Now, in a very traditional organization setup, you might find that even the build part of the team, so let's take a typical project team that's only responsible for build, they might not be cross-functional even with respect to the build aspect. So for example, they might have a team of developers only developing something and then handing over to a team of system testers who then hand over to a team of end-to-end testers and so on. And that's, so yes, there is opportunity to make that itself cross-functional. So within the scope of build itself, we can think about, yes, let's make it cross-functional. Let's have the analysts, developers, testers necessary to progress this from story to ready to deploy. Yeah, that's the first level of cross-functionality. And then we think about DevOps and say, okay, this team is responsible not just for build, but for build and run. So then it becomes more cross-functional. So we add roles like deployment experts, system administrators, and so on to this build team. And now it becomes cross-functional with respect to build and run. But when we talk about the team owning a problem and being able to think for itself about how to solve this problem progressively, verifiably, then you need empowered product owners to join the team, not just collaborate with the team, really join the team. And that's when it becomes even cross-functional enough to own the whole mission of solving the problem, think and build and run. This also implies that because these problems are long-lived and when you map them to the application landscape, they would, a team would need to work with a set of related systems and applications. So for example, in the e-commerce example, a catalog team would have to work with maybe a bunch of, maybe a search index server and a product detail server and so on. So it has to work with a bunch of related components, and each such team has to work with And for this mode to take off, really, for people to own problems and solve it progressively, they need to have a fair degree of strong ownership of these systems and applications. We cannot set up these teams and say code ownership is shared across all teams. Anybody can touch anything, because then you're back to a project style mode of functioning where every project touches whatever systems it needs to touch in order to fulfill the scope of the project. But here in this mode, in order for these teams to be somewhat autonomous and to go about, have their own roadmap and go about it in a structured manner, they need to have custody. They need to be long-term custodians of a set of related systems and applications. And all of this is not, it's all of this when we're in a current setup and we want to move to this kind of setup, it takes quite a bit of working through the existing state to understand, okay, in our context, what are business capabilities and how can we draw boundaries around our current application landscape so that we can have teams who can be custodians of these things. Yeah, it's not a 1 hour exercise. And finally, yes, in terms of the mandate for the team, they need to be required and empowered to solve problems and not just deliver scope. And that's an overall summary of what it means to be in a product mode. I will also going to share an example from ThoughtWorks about what this means. But I just want to go on a tangent for a little bit and talk a little bit about Conway's law here. I mean, it's generally understood as communication structure influences architecture. Yeah, whether it's application architecture or enterprise architecture, that's the general understanding. And so sometimes when I talk about, a single team being the custodian of a bunch of related systems and applications, it's possible for people who take it too literally to say, according to Conway's law, I mean, ideally you should have a team per component, because the moment you have a team owning multiple components, there is a risk that because the communication structure within the team is many to many, then the bunch of components that they own will also all start talking to each other over a period of time. Because, apparently that's what Conway's law implies. And that's where I think we need to, in this aspect, we need to treat it as more of a warning. It's Conway's warning and not so much Conway's law. And I have seen examples of teams who are aware of this dynamic and they can still be the custodian of a bunch of related components. And even though the communication structure within the team is everybody talks to everybody, it doesn't happen that over a period of time, the components that they own also all start talking to each other. No, I mean, a team can be aware of this dynamic and make sure that it keeps its set of systems and applications architecturally sound. So that's just an aside, and with that I want to get into a real example of how this product's mode of operation works inside ThoughtWorks TechOps. So ThoughtWorks is a professional services company. So if you see on the business side, there is a sales cycle. Yeah, so we have salespeople initiating contact with clients, and maybe even before that, there is marketing. So we have a website and so on. That's how people come to know of what we offer. And then, so there is we use Salesforce internally to manage some of our sales communications. And then once we win a project, then we have to think about staffing it. And so there are some internal systems that deal with staffing. But then on the supply side, we also have some recruitment systems. That's how we get people in the first place. And there are performance review systems. There is email and collaboration. So these are the bunch of things that make up the IT landscape within ThoughtWorks for the most part. So, and what I just described is a capabilities view of the application landscape, rather than talking about each and every component, saying, oh, this is the corporate directory and so on, categorizing them into a bunch of capabilities like this. And they are a mix of custom built and off the shelf applications. Now, till about a few years ago, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we used this part of the organization used to operate in projects mode. And what that meant was we did not have this kind of a view of things, but instead we had this view, like we had a bunch of applications and systems, some mix of custom built and off the shelf. And then whenever there was a need to enhance some of these things, bring in some new tools, add some features or so on, projects would get funded. And when projects get funded, a team would get assigned corresponding to that project, and the team would go about touching whatever systems are necessary to deliver that project. Yeah, so that's a project's view of the world. And teams are very transient teams. A team might last 3 months, 6 months. That's the typical duration of a project. And they make changes to whatever systems are required, and they go away. And in the process, what generally happens over a long period of time is architectural debt grows, because what happens is when you're in the thick of a project, our goal is to deliver the project, and so we might end up integrating with some system which is actually meant to be decommissioned, but really within the scope of our project, we don't want to think about integrating with a new upcoming system, because that might mean more effort and so on. We'll go ahead and do the integration here, and we say, okay, some other migration project will take care of what we just did, and this repeats often enough, and you end up in a place in a lot of big organizations where there are 10 different systems doing the same thing for slightly different customer data sets and so on. And there are several things meant to be decommissioned, but they cannot in the current state. And there is a decommissioning roadmap, but there are other priorities because of which you can't take a look at these things. And that soon leads to a situation of you can't be responsive enough to the needs of the business or to the needs of the market, because your house is not in order. So about 5 or 6 years or more ago, we migrated to this a products mode, or in this case, a business aligned capability view of the organization, where we said, okay, let's draw boundaries around these systems and say, okay, these are the systems that are mostly related to recruitment. These are the ones that are mostly related to our marketing and digital and website and so on. So we came up with a bunch of capabilities and did a mapping of systems to capabilities, and we said, okay, each of this is now going to be a long-lived cross-functional team, and the team is now the custodian of a bunch of these systems. And so now you own an internal roadmap. Against each of these, you own an internal roadmap. And of course, on occasion, there will be pieces of work which are cross-cutting, and we will deal with them separately. But for the most part, they're going to have a roadmap that they can own. And certain items might require changes to this system, others might require changes to this system, and so on. But as a whole, now you can hold these things responsible for. They can be now held to. Your job is to ensure that our recruitment systems are effective, that people can effectively work with recruitment systems or sales systems or staffing systems, right? So now they own a larger problem. They own a problem of we have to support effective staffing, effective recruitment, effective sales, and not at a feature level that, okay, we have to deliver this feature by this date. Of course, I mean, there are, more consider. Okay, yeah, before I get to that one, here, this level of thinking about it is okay here, because most of these are internal facing. It's not market facing, except maybe for digital. But if you try to do this in a larger organization with market facing, a lot of market facing digital products, then you might have to go beyond this level of abstraction. So here we call these as long-lived capabilities, and then we have a team per capability. But to take a different, an insurance example, you might have to, it might be that, an insurance business, for example, has, say, two groups. Individual insurance is one group, group insurance is another line of business. And you have market-facing products that are delivered across multiple channels like mobile, web, call center. And commonly, they use a bunch of capabilities that are common. So, for example, policy origination, administration, claims processing, these are potentially common to multiple lines of businesses. So, it's not enough to just think in terms of organizing in terms of capabilities, but really think in terms of, okay, how can I think of my business, the digital infrastructure of my business in terms of products, channels, and capabilities, and then how can I organize teams so that they are aligned with products or underlying capabilities. And each team here is a pod, which is a long-lived, outcome-oriented, cross-functional team. It's think, build, and run, and it is the custodian of a set of related applications or services. And when it starts off, it might find, you might find that when you do this kind of mapping, you might not find all applications neatly falling into one of the boxes here. You might find that, okay, we have this one application which supports both these lines of businesses. And similarly here, you might not find that you might find some applications that are that straddle capabilities, but still you will after a couple of rounds of mapping, we will be able to come up with a distribution where most of the applications, unless you have like really huge monoliths in your organization and that's all there is, in which case, yes, even in that case, taking a hint from Conway's law, it helps to first organize your teams differently and then agree on what are the virtual boundaries within that monolithic system, and then over time, because the teams are now separate, those virtual boundaries will now become stronger as time goes on. So because we have to do some exercise like this when you want to move to a durable organization. A products style organization is a durable organization as compared to a projects organization. Projects organization, teams come and go. They act on the application landscape and they go away. Whereas this style of organization is a durable organization, and so we need to think about a template, for a durable template, and then go about designing teams. There are also other considerations here when we go about doing this. Unlike the projects world, funding tends to be very different here. In case of projects, there is a business case for developing some new feature or application or something, and it gets funded, the project team develops it and goes away. Whereas here, now you're talking about, there are no more projects, right? You have, say, like to take the e-commerce example, you have a catalog team, order management team, and a fulfillment team. And what you're funding is you're really funding a catalog team for a year, right? And you might fund them differently based on, where you want to focus. So you might say, okay, catalog team is going to be the biggest team for this year, and order management is going to be the smallest team, and fulfillment is somewhere in between for this year, because that's how the priorities look for this year, right? But having done that, then it is the teams that the product owners in those teams who own the problems to be solved in catalog, in order management, in fulfillment, and so on, and they own the roadmap and they go about it. Now there will be pieces of work that are cross-cutting, where you need to get something done in catalog as well as order management for that thing to go live. And in those cases, rather than create a separate team for that cross-cutting work, what I advise my clients is to come up with a temporary product owner, or what I call as a solution owner for that cross-cutting piece of work. And this person does not have their own team. Instead, they work. So if it's cross-cutting between catalog and order management, they would work with the catalog team and the order management team. Ensure, coordinate dependencies, make some trade-offs, negotiate scope, etc. Work with their product owners and get it done across those teams. Yeah, and that's how you can handle cross-cutting pieces of work. Some others, for example, if it's the underlying technology platform, right? So earlier in this picture, there is also at the bottom over here. Sorry. It says infrastructure platform. I'm not sure if you can see it, and that's really another cross-cutting team that provides a virtualized infrastructure platform for all of these capability teams, and they try to make it as self-serviceable as possible. So people requisition, say, virtual machines, hard disks, and so on, and once they get that, After that, they are responsible for whatever they deploy on it and for the availability of whatever is deployed on it. The other, when we move from projects to this kind of mode, the other thing to think about is reporting lines, because typically in many big organizations, you will find developers reporting to a development manager who then reports to a head of development, testers reporting to a testing manager who then reports to a head of quality or something like that. And that's one way of doing it. And this is the long-term reporting, whereas on a day-to-day project basis, they report to a project manager or something. But really, if you step back and look at reporting, there are potentially four dimensions of oversight. Yeah, there is the people management type of oversight. There is a technical expertise sort of oversight, and it's not. It could be even something like user experience. Yeah, so all user experience people would probably need some sort of expert level guidance from a user experience expert. So people management, competency, that's the second dimension. Third dimension is the product itself. Yeah. So whatever, if you're aligned in a say business aligned capability like catalog, then yes, you need to have somebody who owns the roadmap for catalog and who owns the vision for catalog. So product, and the fourth dimension is delivery. Yeah, making sure that on an ongoing basis that there are no bottlenecks and that there is ensuring flow within these teams. So there are potentially four dimensions, and I guess it depends on every organizational context which of those dimensions they want to prioritize and say this is the reporting line. So if you take the Spotify model, for example, although they have the squads, the reporting is not as per the squads. The reporting is horizontal to the chapter leads. So the chapter leads in Spotify function as competency experts as well as people managers. Now I think that's a difficult combination to hire for. I think it's difficult to hire people who can qualify as experts in a particular competency as well as who qualify as good people managers. But that is the model within Spotify, and these are potentially the four dimensions. And I think it's we have to get into the context of a particular organization to decide which of these dimensions is important enough to convert it into a reporting line. And finally, when we talk about moving away from IT being just a delivery organization to being overall jointly owning a problem and solving a problem, then we will also have to think about if there are existing product management organizations or digital organizations within the company, then really they need to in a way merge together in some fashion so that they can jointly own problems. Otherwise, it's difficult to move away from where product management comes up with a high level solution idea, and then it's handed over to IT for delivery and so on. So the way I like to capture that is we've moved in many organizations have moved away from the traditional just business and IT to they are somewhere here where some organizations have either a product organization or a digital organization in addition to IT, and collectively that's referred to as the tech side of the company. But really, I think a lot of digital businesses, native digital businesses, are already in this state where there is really no business and IT. Instead, there is what I call as commercial. Commercial is different from business. To give you an example, if you look at Spotify, the platform part of Spotify is really this. It's digital plus product plus IT. So it's a business platform organization. And the commercial side is the side that deals with, signing agreements with, say, leading music artists and so on. So the difference is when you say business and IT, usually business owns strategy and IT is a support function. Whereas when you say commercial and platform, it's about realizing that strategy is now co-owned. Both these organizations together own strategy, and but still from a platform point of view, you might still have portions that are product, digital, IT, but really it's about blurring those boundaries and together owning problems and solving them progressively and verifiably in this new mode.